Now, if I could talk to dogs, you'd be impressed, right? Hopefully we'll be impressed. Well, I can't. But I can talk to global diaspora, millions of global diaspora every year. Now, the word diaspora refers to the spread of any people from their original homeland. Who are they? They're our globally scattered family, your family. And they share an emotional connection to your community, the ancestral land, and its culture. Often we think of those connected through ancestry, but it also includes those that may have worked, lived, studied, or even married somebody from your community. Ultimately, their emotional connection will result in jobs, investment, and of critical importance, a relationship, a global network. Now, to begin to understand this whole space, I first started looking at second-generation diaspora around the world that had mainly connections to Europe. Because in recent years, these huge DNA and family tree websites have spent hundreds of millions getting their interest. Now, I totally understand the importance of DNA and family tree research, but when I had my own DNA tested, I received an email saying, you share 46.2 centimeters of DNA with Tim in Oklahoma. Now, what was I supposed to do with that? I imagined myself going on this huge journey over to Oklahoma, 24 hours from Ireland all the way to the great state of Oklahoma. I'm standing there in front of Tim on his doorstep. I've got tears in my eyes. I'm saying, Tim, 46.2 centimeters. Can you believe it? 46.2. What would Tim do? Tim would ask me to leave, right? Tim would say, never come back. And in the future, can I say, don't contact anybody with any less than at least a meter of shared DNA, right? So obviously it's ludicrous. If I was to have a relationship with Tim, it would be based on our family name. It would be based on our shared interest in our origin, our culture. That relationship would have legs. Now, every single one of us here have these scattered families all over the world that want to connect. If you're family living away from the ancestral home, you share deeper family relationships, access to incredible cultures, a greater understanding of what your ancestors went through. People wear their cultural identity as a badge of honor. And the more you live away from the home, the ancestral home, the more that badge becomes important. Consequently, if your family is still living in the ancestral home, you don't necessarily crave connection, right? You're surrounded by culture. But I encourage you, answer their call. You might even be skeptical of diaspora reaching out. Answer their call. They're simply saying, do you want to know more about yourself? Now, this wonderful woman is Mary Butler. She was my great-grandmother. She had 19 children. 19 children, right? Think about that. I'm told those aren't her hips, rather the Jodhpur horse riding pants of the era. Now, Mary's 19 children resulted in our own globally scattered family. The last of those 19 is my grandmother, Frances, who's 95 years young. Now, in recent years, unfortunately, Frances has been pretty much bedridden. She had 6 children herself. She has a lot of back pain. She was rushed to hospital a while back, and we all feared the worst. Our big Irish family, we went to the hospital bedside. We thought, oh my God, Frances, is it her heart? What's going on? She's had a good innings, God love her. The doctor arrived at the bedside and he had his clipboard. He said, look, we've run all the tests on Frances. What your grandmother has is a hangover. Now, I had to ask permission to tell that story, so I'm very sorry. So this is our family, right? These are the global descendants of Mary's 19 children, Frances' 6 children. We're the Butlers of Kilkenny. We're the first generation that can meet, not just face-to-face, subject to global pandemics, of course, but we can keep that relationship alive throughout the year through social media. We can share the family birthdays, see when the children go to school. We can even globally argue. And what's more family than that, right? So we are a living global family. Now, in the corner you can see the 12th century castle, Kilkenny Castle. That was run, of course, by the Butlers of Ormond. Now, we too are butlers, but more in the literal sense, because we were the butlers teaching the royal butlers how to ride show jumping horses. Now, In the next picture, you'll see a derelict house. That's our derelict house. It's what remains of the ancestral home. In the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see there's a blocked-up window, and that's where the little girls of the family used to escape at night to go to dances. Those little girls, of course, were our grandmothers. This derelict home is our emotional connection to Kilkenny. Now, I speak to genealogists all over the world, and they talk about that moment when they bring the diaspora home to these ancestral places. Sometimes it's a derelict house, sometimes it's a farmyard, sometimes it's just a field. And for the first time, these diaspora can suddenly realize they stand on the grass where their ancestors stood. They breathe the same air. And this emotional connection is there forever. They shed a tear, they say. Now, we all don't have these stunning tourist sites, and I'm talking about communities all over the world, but we do all have these access to authentic ancestral homes. And that's the key. It's about winning hearts and minds to the ancestral homes. Now, what happens when you meet your globally scattered family? Well, it was funny. I mean, they arrive with a huge amount of research, and suddenly I'm looking at my family history going back to the 1700s. I'm learning about myself. But what started off as a relationship between family tree and research is now just a normal relationship. I am entirely grateful to truly understand my globally scattered family. And I know their trip home means the world to them. So diaspora are families, and it's about relationships between families and villages. And when you take all of these families together, you create huge global networks and economic value. And this is why governments all over the world are so interested in their diaspora. The World Bank said that in this year alone, first-generation diaspora are going to send a staggering $713 billion to their home countries, just in this year alone. So I'm often asked, well, how could we create some environment where any community could reach out to their diaspora? And I came up with this analogy. I said, you'd have to create a secret sauce that no matter what community you applied that to, it would unlock these relationships, the jobs, the investment, etc. And of course, the problem was then they asked me to describe that further, and now I have to give you this cheesy analogy, right? The first thing we would need is a fun cooking pot, right? Everything we do when it comes to diaspora has to be fun. People are drawn towards fun groups. You're also asking them to change their busy daily lives, so it's got to be fun. Now, I had no idea what a fun cooking pot looks like, so I asked my two little girls to inspire me, and they came up with this picture. Apparently inspired by their dad's vast collection of Hawaiian shirts. The energy to keep these diaspora engagement programs going has to come from local government. And they say they need the support of local voters. And the local voters need to know that the modest amount of money spent on the diaspora programs comes back 10, 20-fold. Now, into the pot goes the family, and that's the base from which we hold everything. And then goes in the family research, the history, the DNA projects, the community projects, the business projects, the jobs initiatives. And now we have this secret sauce that unlocks those jobs in tourism. The key thing is that the sauce is given away for free to everybody. So whether you're the Tralee family that stayed in the homestead, or you're the second, third, fourth generation of Tralee family that live in New Jersey or wherever in the world, you access that for free. Now, how did I come to know all this? Well, I'm a bit of a data nerd, and I've been studying a lot of online behavior. And I came up when I identified that there was a series of the same behaviors no matter what group of people we looked at. Those with Irish identity, Welsh identity, Italian, Indian, everything. They all shared the same thing. The first thing I noticed was that as you go through the calendar, any of these big calendar events, there's surges of interest in their ancestral identity before and after because they're physically meeting up. So we're talking 4th of July, Thanksgiving, Diwali, Cinco de Mayo, all this global interest. Now behind me you can see on our network all the interest around this year's St. Patrick's Day. All the global Irish diaspora sending back their love, showing their interest in Irish culture and identity. They want to know more. So governments have to understand these surges of interest. They can even have their own national days to get some focus and energy. The next thing I noticed was age. Right? So over 35s are 5 times more engaged than their diaspora than the under 35s. We think it's to do with the birth of a diaspora child. That suddenly makes them remember their importance of their cultural identity. Consequently, those that are under 35 are 5 times less engaged, and that's a concern. If we can't understand and filter our messages to bring on the young next generation of diaspora, we lose the next generation of Irish Americans, Canadian, Welsh, Spanish, Mexicans. They're all just gone forever. The next thing we found out was gender. Women are far more engaged in their diaspora when you look at it on a global scale than men are. We call it the strong mammy factor. Now, I was reared by a lot of strong women in my family. I've got my own strong Irish mammy. I've got my wife, my 2 gorgeous girls. I'm acutely aware that they're more proactive about the family gatherings and the engagements. But when we do have these global gatherings and they come back to Ireland and places around the world, it is 50-50 male-female. So where the mammy leads, the dad isn't far behind. And what happens when you meet the global family? They talk about their matriarch, the patriarch in their family that instilled that cultural identity. Again, this strong mammy factor, we call it. Now, what's interesting is if that person, that matriarch, that patriarch has passed away, by keeping a relationship going with the home country, it keeps the spirit of that person alive, and that's kind of what's going on in the background. The next interesting issue is the whole sense of place. So it's interesting. If anyone spent any time in the US, you might be familiar where you've got circumstance where people say, like, I'm 5/12 Italian, I'm 4/8 Irish, and you're out with a calculator. I think that's brilliant. They can keep all these different cultural elements alive. I came across an Indian man, no ancestral line to Ireland. He said, I'm Irish. I said, okay, well, how? He said that I married an Irish woman. My kids are brought up very much in their Irish culture. And even though we can't be there, we see ourselves as Irish. So this man went on as a C-level executive. He went on to mentor 5 Irish businesses to great success. So we can't just think of our diaspora all fitting into one category. Final element is culture, my favorite, right? So every single region, every country has its own twist and taste of various elements of culture. We're talking sport, music, food, literature, etc., etc. And the diaspora love this. It's a way in which they can live their connection when they can't physically be there, right? I can cook Irish food in Chicago. I can listen to French poetry in Shanghai. I can read Greek poetry or whatever music in Mumbai. It's a transferable asset. The only thing to be aware of is there's certain topics that have huge, massive appeal: sport, music, food, business, community. Now you're talking to all your diaspora. Other topics look like myths and legends, art, far less interest. So it's just important to be conscious of which content you're pushing through to the global diaspora. Now, I spend most of my time going around to communities, local governments and national governments around the world, and I say, look, this diaspora is the most important jewel you will ever have in your community. But ultimately, in order to realize that jewel, it comes down to us as individuals. I received thousands and thousands of messages from diaspora all over the world, all seeking connections back home. And unfortunately, to a large extent, it falls on deaf ears. I'm really here today to speak on their behalf. Integrate and invite your globally scattered families into your local community. Get to know them. And in turn, I guarantee you're going to get to know yourself. We are all just one link in a family chain that goes back sometimes hundreds of years. If we don't care, that chain is gone forever. If we do care, your community and indeed your country will have the strongest asset they've ever had in their diaspora. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.